The sun rose slow and red over the New Mexico territory, as if reluctant to touch a land too long stained by blood and betrayal. Dust curled in lazy spirals over the plains, brushing against charred mesquite and thorny sagebrush like fingers searching for something lost. On the horizon, a lone rider cut a dark figure against the orange dawn, his silhouette sharp, unwavering, silent. Samuel Carter hadn't spoken to another living soul in 47 days. His ranch, a modest sprawl of dying grass and creaking fences, lay at the edge of Apache land, where the maps ended and the silence began. He lived with ghosts now, his wife and child, both taken by fever 2 winters past. He buried them beneath a cottonwood tree and stopped attending town meetings or church gatherings. What was left to say? He rose each morning with the sun and worked the land until it burned, his skin weathered and calloused by grief more than labor. Today should have been like any other. Ride the east fence line. Check for coyotes. Return before dusk. But something in the wind unsettled him, sharp, metallic, carrying the scent of ash. Elko, his black stallion, caught the scent too. The horse shifted beneath him, ears flicking. Samuel tightened the reins, urging him forward. It started with the birds, vultures, maybe 6 or 7, circling low above a far bluff. Too low, too steady. He felt it in his chest before he saw anything, a kind of pressure, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. He rode toward it, every step of the horse kicking up doubts he tried to bury. The cottonwood stood alone on the bluff's edge, gnarled and bare, its bark cracked like old leather. Samuel slowed as he approached. Elko snorted and stopped. The birds scattered at the sound, but what hung from the tree didn't move. She dangled by a length of frayed rope, her feet bare and limp, her body still wrapped in the thin folds of a deerskin dress. Her long black hair had fallen across her face, tangled in strands of wind and dirt. Around her neck, tied with rawhide, swung a jagged piece of wood. The words carved into it were crude, uneven, and scorched at the edges. "White man can't forgive." Samuel remained still. The wind picked up, brushing against his coat and lifting the sign enough for it to creak on its tether. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, watching. The image dug into his memory like a splinter, something old, something familiar. The war had left behind plenty of bodies, but this wasn't war. This was a message. He dismounted slowly, not out of fear but reverence. The air was sacred in that moment, heavy with the finality of death. But something about her posture felt wrong. Her arms weren't bound. Her skin, though bruised, showed no signs of struggling. This wasn't a hanging. It was a display. He stepped forward, boots crunching over frostbitten weeds. Her chest, was it rising? He leaned in, eyes narrowing. A moment passed. Then another. And then, impossibly, her lips parted. A shallow breath escaped. "Jesus," he muttered. He didn't stop to question. Years in the army had taught him to move before thinking. He climbed the tree fast, ignoring the protest of aging joint. The rope cut roughly into the branch. He saw that it wasn't tied but nailed. Someone had meant for her to die there, but not quickly. He sawed at the rope with his hunting knife, the tension making it slow. Below, Elko shifted nervously, sensing movement. With one final pull, the rope snapped and the girl dropped into Samuel's arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her face tilted toward his chest, eyes closed, skin burning with fever. He pressed his ear to her chest. Still breathing. Barely. He carried her to the horse and wrapped her in his own coat. As they rode, her head bobbed gently against his shoulder, her warmth bleeding into him like the first sunlight after a long winter. Back at the ranch, he laid her on the bed he hadn't touched in over a year. It still smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The moment was delicate, fragile, like glass on a ledge. He covered her with a wool blanket, then crouched beside her with a bowl of cool water and a rag. Her arms bore bruises. Her feet were torn. He worked slowly, cleaning the dirt from her skin with care he hadn't known he still possessed. She didn't wake, not fully. But once, her eyes fluttered open, dark and wide like the desert at midnight. She didn't speak, didn't scream, just watched him. "It's all right," he said softly, more for himself than for her. "You're safe now." She blinked once, then drifted back into sleep. That night, he sat by the fireplace, the girl still unconscious behind him. The wooden sign lay on the floor beside him. He stared at it for a long time before tossing it into the flames. It cracked, hissed, then disappeared into ash. He poured himself a glass of rye whiskey and drank it slow. Her presence stirred something buried in him, a memory not of war, but of his daughter, Sarah. The way she used to sing when storms rolled in, thinking her voice could scare them off. The way his wife, Ellie, would braid her hair before church, laughing at how stubborn her curls were. The sound of their laughter was the only thing he'd never been able to forget. Now here was this girl, this stranger, breathing in their bed, caught between life and death, and carrying a message he didn't understand. He rose at dawn the next morning, weary and unsure. When he checked the bedroom, she was sitting up. Barely. Propped against the headboard, eyes hollow but alive. He stepped inside. "You're awake." She said nothing. He pointed to himself. "Samuel." Still nothing. He tried again. "You." Her gaze drifted to the window. She winced when she shifted, her arms trembling with the effort. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Just breath, strained and thin. He didn't press. She wasn't ready. Maybe she'd never be. In the days that followed, she didn't speak. But she watched. Every movement, every word. He cooked simple meals. Beans, biscuits, eggs when the hens cooperated. She ate little, mostly broth, but her strength returned in inches. One morning, he found her standing by the window, bathed in pale sunlight. She didn't notice him at first, lost in whatever world lived behind her eyes. When she did, she nodded once. That was the first gesture of trust. Samuel didn't understand why he was trying. Why he kept making her food, tending to her wounds, leaving a glass of water beside the bed each night. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was something deeper. On the 6th day, she reached for the bread before he could place it on the table. On the 7th, she pointed to herself and whispered, hoarsely, "Nalina." He froze, then smiled faintly. "Nalina," he repeated. She nodded. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was waiting, like kindling before a spark. As dusk settled over the ranch that evening, Samuel stood on the porch, watching the wind dance across the field. Inside, Nalina hummed a melody he didn't recognize, soft, mournful, but beautiful. He didn't know who had left her on that tree. He didn't know what "white man can't forgive" was meant to say. But he felt the truth of it in his bones. And for the first time in years, Samuel Carter felt something he hadn't dared to feel. Hope. He didn't know where this path would lead. But he knew now, it had already begun. The days that followed unfolded with a kind of quiet tension, like a storm looming just beyond the mountains. Nalina spoke little. When she did, her words were soft, careful, as though every syllable had to be weighed before crossing her lips. Her voice carried an unfamiliar cadence, poetic, almost melodic, rooted in a language Samuel couldn't understand but felt drawn to just the same. She moved with caution, like someone unused to comfort, someone unsure when the floor beneath her might vanish again. He noticed how her fingers curled protectively around a spoon, how she flinched at sudden sounds, how her eyes tracked every movement in the room. She didn't just watch him, she studied him, quietly evaluating the man who had cut her down and given her warmth without asking why. Samuel made no demands. He asked no questions about the tree, the sign, or who had done it. He simply let the silence breathe, trusting that truth, like healing, needed time. In return, she began to trust him in her own way. One night, he returned from the barn to find the fire already lit, a pot of beans simmering beside it. She'd fed the chickens, washed the bowl from breakfast. Small things, but they struck Samuel with surprising force. It had been so long since anyone had shared in his space, his routine, his life. He watched her in the firelight, her face cast in flickering amber, her fingers threading the fringe of the quilt like she was braiding a memory into its fabric. She did not look at him, but she did not shy from his presence either. That alone felt like something sacred. Over time, she began to speak more. Bits of stories, snippets of songs. Her English was broken but vivid, colored by metaphors and images that painted emotion more than fact. She told him of rivers that whispered, of trees that remembered, of mothers who sang to the stars so their children would dream without fear. Samuel listened, absorbing each word as if it were a prayer. He didn't always understand, but he felt the meaning. It lingered in the air like the smell of rain. In return, he told her of his daughter, Sarah, of Ellie, his wife, and how she had died holding Samuel's hand in the dead of winter, whispering his name with frost on her breath. He told her of the war, how men bled for ideas they barely believed in, how he watched brothers turn to monsters and heroes become shadows. Nalina didn't interrupt. She simply listened, her dark eyes never leaving his face. When he faltered, she reached across the table and laid a hand on his. Light, warm, steady. One evening, after supper, she stood in the doorway and asked if she could see the land. He led her gently, guiding her steps over uneven ground. She walked with care, barefoot despite the cold, the earth seeming to respond to her presence. They stopped near the fence line, where the hills dipped low and the horizon stretched wide enough to feel infinite. She took a deep breath, her eyes closing. When she opened them, there were tears, but they did not fall. She looked to him, then to the setting sun. "I was taken," she said at last. Her voice was steady. "They said I was payment. For land. For cattle. I did not understand." Samuel's fists clenched. He said nothing. "They tied me there," she continued, looking past him now. "Left me like game. For whoever found me." He stared at the dust curling near her feet, the ache in his chest deepening. He had heard stories like this, but they always felt distant. Now they stood inches from him, breathing, scarred, and alive. "I did not die," she whispered, almost to herself. "That is the only mistake they made." Silence stretched between them. A cold wind rolled down from the hills. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were useless, yet honest. She looked at him then, really looked. "You cut me down. That is not small." That night, she did not sleep in the bed. Instead, she sat on the floor by the fire, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Samuel didn't ask why. He took the opposite chair and sat with her. For hours, neither spoke. There was something holy in the stillness. He watched as her gaze shifted to the flames, her eyes softening. Her hands, no longer trembling, rested in her lap, fingers slowly uncoiling. She looked different now, less like someone hiding from the world, and more like someone stepping cautiously back into it. The next day, she asked for a knife. He hesitated. "To carve," she explained. "Not to fight." He handed her his smallest blade. She took a piece of driftwood from the pile near the stove and sat outside for most of the day, carving in silence. When he passed by her on his way to the well, she gave him a look. Not a smile, not quite, but something close. It startled him. By dusk, she presented him the carving. It was a hawk, wings outstretched, talons curled, mid-flight. He turned it over in his hands, marveling at the detail. It wasn't perfect, but it had soul. "It flies even with broken wings," she said. He looked at her, and something inside him shifted. As the days turned to weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with shared chores, feeding livestock, mending the fence, hauling water. Afternoons were quieter. He taught her how to shoot. She taught him how to read the wind. Sometimes they rode together, Elko beneath them, tracing forgotten trails through the hills. There was no plan, only presence. In the quiet of those rides, their bond deepened. They spoke less, but the silence no longer carried pain. It carried understanding. She would laugh, sometimes, a soft sound like rain falling on leaves. He found himself watching for it, craving it. Her joy, when it came, was gentle and fleeting, like sunlight through smoke, but it lit something in him he thought had long turned to ash. One night, as they sat beneath the stars, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not move. He let her rest there, listening to her breath, slow and even. "You are different," she said. "Different how?" "You look at me. You don't look through me." He wanted to say something, but no words felt right. So he simply reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. The next morning, he found her standing by the cottonwood tree. The one where he had first seen her. She traced the bark with her fingers, eyes unreadable. "This tree," she said, "knows pain. But it still stands." He nodded. "So do you." She turned to him, something burning behind her eyes. "Will you help me find them? The ones who did it." His breath caught. He hadn't expected that. He looked at her. Stronger now, yes, but not whole. Not yet. "It's dangerous." She met his gaze. "I know. And if we find them?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't want revenge. I want them to know I lived." That struck him harder than he expected. "Then yes," he said. "I'll help you." She nodded once, as if that was all she needed to hear. That night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled low, she came to him. Not with words, but with closeness. She took his hand and led him to the fire, sat beside him, and laid her head on his lap. He brushed her hair back, letting his fingers linger. He hadn't touched another soul in years. Now, he found himself afraid, not of her, but of what she awakened in him. Hope again. Love, maybe. Outside, the wind carried a different sound. Not warning. Not pain. Something new. The beginning of a return. They left the ranch before dawn, riding east under a crescent moon. Nalina sat tall in the saddle now, wrapped in Samuel's old duster and carrying a bow slung across her back. She had fashioned it herself over the past week, from seasoned juniper and sinew, her fingers working with the quiet precision of someone who had carved survival from silence. Samuel rode beside her, his rifle strapped over his shoulder, a coil of resolve beneath the surface of his calm expression. They said little, letting the rhythm of the horses and the murmurs of wind through dry grass carry the hours forward. The journey had no exact destination, only a direction. Nalina remembered where she'd been taken from, roughly 2 days south of the ranch, near an abandoned trading post where the land narrowed into Scrub Canyon. That was where the men had caught her. She never saw all their faces, but one had a voice like gravel and another smelled of tobacco and copper. Those details were branded into her memory. The land grew harsher as the day wore on. Dust devils spun like spirits across the prairie, and broken cattle fences slumped under the weight of time and sun. Once they passed the charred remains of a wagon, its axle snapped and wheels half buried in sand. Samuel dismounted briefly, sifting through the wreckage, but found nothing useful, just ashes and fragments of old lives. That night they camped beside a shallow creek. The water was bitter but clean. As Samuel gathered kindling, Nalina stood barefoot in the cold stream, her eyes locked on the horizon. She hadn't smiled since they left. Her face was carved with focus now, edges sharpened by memory. He watched her from the fire pit, struck again by the transformation. She no longer looked like the broken girl hanging from a tree. She was becoming something else entirely. Stronger, yes, but also distant, like she was walking a path he couldn't fully follow. As darkness fell, she spoke. "I dreamt of them again." Samuel stirred the fire. "The men?" She nodded. "They laughed. Like children. They spoke of my blood like it was money." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he passed her a tin cup of hot broth. She took it with a nod. "I want to see their faces again," she said. "I want to know what fear looks like on them." Samuel stared into the flames. "You sure that's what you need?" Nalina was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't know what I need. But I know what I feel." He understood that. Revenge wasn't clean. It didn't soothe what had been lost. But sometimes it was the only thing that made sense. Still, he feared what it might cost her. The second day brought them deeper into forgotten country. Hills rose like knuckles from the earth, and the sky grew heavy with clouds. Around noon, they found a rusted horseshoe nailed to a post, the first sign of man they'd seen in hours. Nalina paused, her eyes narrowing. She dismounted and crouched, examining the ground. "Tracks," she said. Samuel followed her gaze. Barely visible impressions in the dust. 2 horses. 1 booted foot. 1 with moccasins. Old. "No," she whispered. 2 days. Maybe less. They moved with renewed purpose, trailing the prints into a narrow canyon flanked by cliffs. The air felt different here, still, tense. Samuel felt the hairs on his arms rise. They were halfway through the canyon when the shot rang out. A bullet hissed past Samuel's ear, splintering the rock beside him. He dropped from the saddle and rolled behind a boulder, heart pounding. Nalina had already taken cover, her bow drawn, eyes scanning the ridge. "Sniper!" Samuel barked. Another shot. This one closer. He peeked around the rock. Movement on the ledge, just a flicker of cloth. He raised his rifle and squeezed the trigger. The echo cracked like thunder. Silence followed. Nalina dashed from cover to cover, fast and low, until she reached a higher outcropping. She loosed an arrow. A grunt echoed across the canyon, followed by a muffled thud. Samuel moved quickly, covering the approach. When they reached the ledge, they found a man sprawled in the dust, white, rough-bearded, with tobacco-stained fingers. One of her captors? She stepped closer. Her expression didn't change as she looked down at the dying man. He coughed, blood trickling from his lips. "Why you?" he rasped, eyes widening as he saw her. "Do you know my name?" she asked, her voice cold. He coughed again. "Didn't know you was alive." She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his chest. "Tell me who was with you." He shook his head weakly. "Won't talk." She leaned in, her whisper almost kind. "Then you will die nameless." His body stilled minutes later. Samuel watched in silence as she closed the man's eyes. They found a map in his coat, rough but clear enough to mark a camp farther east. 3 men. Possibly 4. They buried the body beneath a cairn of stone. Nalina placed a single feather on top. "He did not ask forgiveness," she said. "He didn't deserve it," Samuel replied. That night a storm rolled in. Thunder echoed across the hills, and rain lashed the earth in sheets. They sheltered beneath an overhang, huddled beside a flickering flame. Nalina sat close to him, her shoulders trembling, not from cold, but from something deeper. He wrapped an arm around her, and she didn't pull away. "They took my voice," she said suddenly. "That day. Not just with rope. With fear." He held her tighter. "But it's coming back," she continued. "When I kill the last one, it will be whole again." "Don't let them define your strength," he said quietly. "You're already whole, whether they see it or not." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Why do you care?" Samuel didn't answer right away. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Because you remind me what life feels like. Because when I look at you, I feel something that's not grief." She searched his face, then leaned in. Their foreheads touched. A heartbeat passed. Then another. "We are both haunted," she whispered. "But we're not alone anymore," he said. When morning came, the storm had passed. The sky was clear, but the air held the scent of something inevitable. They saddled up again, this time with grim certainty. The path forward wasn't just about reckoning, it was about freedom. They rode in silence until they reached the canyon mouth. There, just over the ridge, thin trails of smoke rose in the distance. A camp. 4 figures moved among the wagons. Horses tethered. A fire burning low. Nalina reached for her bow. Samuel steadied her wrist. "Careful. We do this right. No mistakes." She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the camp. "This ends today," she said. and in her voice there was no doubt, only fire. The wind fell silent just before the first shot was fired. Samuel and Nalina crouched behind a jagged outcrop on the ridge above the camp. Below, 4 men moved like ghosts through the early light, their silhouettes long and distorted by the low-hanging sun. The air was cold, tense with the weight of something final. Nalina's breath fogged in front of her face, but her hands were steady, her eyes sharper than he'd ever seen them. "These are the ones," she said, barely louder than a whisper. "The man with the red scarf," he laughed the loudest. Samuel studied the camp through the scope of his rifle. There was no mercy in him now, only focus. Every bone in his body knew this moment had been coming since the day he cut her down from that tree. No law would ever reach this corner of the land. No judge would ever see the faces of these men. It was up to them now, this reckoning. "Once we start," he said softly, "there's no walking it back." "I have no intention of walking away," Nalina replied. He glanced sideways. Her face was calm, but beneath it lived something ancient, a righteous fury carved into her soul by pain. She wasn't afraid of death anymore. She had already met it once and walked away. She knocked an arrow, the string whispering as she pulled it back. "Left side," she said. He shifted his aim, tracking the tallest of the men, the one hauling a bucket of water toward the horses. Samuel exhaled slowly, finger tightening on the trigger. The gunshot cracked like thunder. The man dropped before the sound reached him. The camp exploded into chaos. Men scrambled for rifles, diving behind barrels and crates. Nalina's arrow flew, swift and silent, and struck one through the throat. He staggered, gurgling, then crumpled beside the fire. Samuel fired again. Missed. Cursed. Another man popped up from behind a wagon, returning fire with a revolver. Bullets shattered rocks near their heads, forcing them down. "Flank left," Samuel shouted, already on the move. Nalina darted like a shadow, feet light on the stones. She was hunting now, not hiding. He covered her as she moved from rock to boulder, arrow after arrow finding its mark with terrifying precision. When she ran out, she drew the long knife from her belt. Samuel saw the last 2 trying to mount their horses and flee. One succeeded, galloping toward the trees. The other, red scarf, was thrown by his skittish mare and landed hard. He scrambled, reaching for his pistol, but a shadow fell across him. "Nalina." She said nothing, just stepped forward, her knife gleaming in the sun. The man backed away on his elbows, choking on dirt. "Please, please. I didn't know who you were." "You knew what I was," she said, her voice like stone. "And it was enough for you to hang me." Samuel watched from the ridge as she raised the knife and hesitated. The man's eyes were wide with terror. She could end it now. Justice, vengeance, it all lived in this moment. But she stepped back. "I want you to live," she said. "I want you to wake up every day knowing you were spared by the girl you tried to kill. Let that rot you from the inside." He sobbed, curling into the dirt. She turned and walked away, her shoulders shaking, not from weakness but the weight of release. Samuel climbed down, lowering his rifle as he reached her. "You did the hard thing," he said. "No," she replied. "I did the right thing. They don't get to own my soul." The fire in the camp was dying. 2 bodies lay still. The third man, shot but alive, had crawled under a wagon, unconscious. The fourth, the one she spared, lay weeping in the dust. It was over. But peace didn't come with the end. That night they camped far from the site. The silence between them was different now. Not tense, not broken, but heavy with something unspoken. Samuel stoked the fire, glancing across it at her. She stared into the flames like they held secrets only she could read. "You didn't have to let him go," he said quietly. "I did," she replied. "Because if I killed him, I'd still hear his voice in my sleep. And I'm tired of hearing them." He nodded. There was a lesson there, one he wasn't sure he would have had the strength to learn himself. She stood, stepping around the fire and sitting beside him. For a long time, she didn't speak. Just leaned against his shoulder, her presence warm, real. "Samuel," she said softly. He turned to her. "You saved me. Twice. Once from death, and once from becoming someone else." He met her gaze, something catching in his throat. "You did the hard work. I just stood beside you." She leaned in then, no hesitance, no fear. Their lips met, slow and searching, like two broken things trying to remember what it felt like to be whole. When she pulled away, her eyes were shining. "You gave me something I didn't think I deserved." "Hope?" he asked. "Home." The word hit him like a breath he hadn't known he was holding. It was true. Somewhere between the silence and the storms, they'd carved something out of the dust and blood. Not a promise, but a possibility. In the morning, she told him she had to go. "There are others," she said. "Girls like me. Lost. Waiting for someone to help them find the path back." He wanted to ask her to stay. His heart ached to do it. But he saw the fire in her eyes, the purpose. She had found her strength, and it wasn't meant to be caged by walls or fences. He saddled Elko for her, tied a bundle of food and supplies behind the saddle. "Will I see you again?" he asked. She smiled, a real smile this time, soft and radiant. "If the wind carries us to the same fire, we will meet." She pressed her forehead to his, the same way she had the night before the storm. Then she turned and rode east, into the rising sun, her silhouette sharp and proud against the gold-washed land. Samuel watched until she vanished into the horizon. He stood there a long time, the wind brushing past him, the fire behind still flickering low. Then, with a sigh, he turned back toward the ranch, toward the quiet fields, the creaking fences, the life he had reclaimed piece by piece. He knew now that healing didn't always come in one place. It could ride beside you for a while, teach you something, and then leave you stronger than before. He would carry her story, and she would carry his. In a world shaped by pain, it's not vengeance that heals us, it's the choice to keep walking. Even when it hurts, even when we're alone. We keep riding because sometimes, healing is found in the miles between broken and whole.